I was able to click record, so recording
Perfect.
started.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Advancing Employee Ownership Through City Policy. I'm Thomas Dudley from Certified Employee Owned, joined by Nina Stender, also from Certified EO, Hillary Abell from Project Equity, and Kevin McPhillips from the Pennsylvania Center for Employee Ownership. And today we're going to be talking about city policy. And I'm particularly excited about this topic because I think the cities and employee ownership, I think they fit very well together. I mean, we all know the good things that employee-owned companies do for local economies, the way that when you spend your money at an employee-owned business, you are putting money in the pockets of people who work in that community, building wealth for members of your community. We all know the ties that employee-owned businesses have to their local communities through that local ownership, so much less likely to do things like move down the road for tax incentives, right? So just all sorts of great things that employee-owned companies do for local economies and local communities. I think that means that every city should know about employee ownership as an option for local economic development. And for us as a community, it just seems like the city level, there's so much potential for growth. So Nina and I started talking to each other about this earlier in the year because we were seeing, we'd hear about from a friend something going on, or see a news article, or hear about, for example, talking to Project Equity, hear about something they're doing. And so it just felt like there's a lot going on here. And we started thinking, well, what's the landscape look like? And so looking around, we couldn't really find kind of a good summary of all that. And so we thought, okay, well, why don't we we'll start building that and start talking to people, and kind of one thing led to another. And ultimately what we ended up doing is putting together trying to get a map of the landscape. And really the whole point of doing that was to just try to understand what's going on and then feed that back to the people who are out there on the ground actually doing this work, to hopefully start some conversations and just ideally make everyone kind of more successful by helping everyone see what's going on out there. So the goal today on this webinar is basically to do that feedback, to give you all a good look at what's happening. We will, as a follow-up, share a link to that landscape, that map that we put together, which is basically a spreadsheet, a Google sheet with all the cities that we saw and all the different things we saw going on there, as well as who's involved where. It's definitely a work in progress. So if you see something on there that maybe we didn't get 100% right, or if maybe we're missing something, definitely let us know. And our goal is to basically keep that up to date and keep that going, so that is a look at what is happening in the city level, or at the city level. Specifically today on this webinar, what we're going to do is, first of all, we would like to spend a second to acknowledge all the organizations doing all this great work at the city level. Nina's going to walk us through that city policy landscape, share the summary of what we found. Hillary's going to walk us through all the great things that Project Equity is doing across many different cities. And Kevin's going to walk us through one of the most in-depth initiatives that we found in the city of Pittsburgh. All right, Nina, you want to take it from here?
Great. Yeah, so we wanted to start off by highlighting some of the key organizations that were involved in the policy initiatives that we found. Project Equity has a hand in a lot of these initiatives. We'll be hearing from Hillary about that later. They were involved in 12 of the 32 initiatives that we found. Democracy at Work Institute was also involved in 11 of the 32 initiatives, and 8 of these 11 are connected to their ongoing Shared Equity in Economic Development Seed Fellowship. So we want to acknowledge, in particular, Dawi as well as Zen Trenholm. Zen has been tracking local initiatives on the co-op side and made significant contributions to our findings. And Dawi has also been leading field efforts in equipping cities to develop and implement employee ownership initiatives. So as you can see on the screen, all sorts of organizations are doing great work, and that's highlighted in our spreadsheet tracker, which you all can take a look at later as well. So we really appreciate everyone who took the time to speak with us, as well as to review the data we found. And through everyone's contributions, we were able to pull together a fairly comprehensive collection of information. So diving into the policy initiatives a little bit. So in terms of policy initiatives, our approach to identifying these was to reach out to individuals and organizations in the field and ask them what they were involved in, what other initiatives they knew of, where they were happening. And what we found was 32 policy initiatives at the local level across 25 localities and including at least 20 active initiatives. In our research, we were looking at policies advancing all forms of employee ownership. We found that 15 of these had a co-op specific focus, whereas 17 of them supported multiple forms of employee ownership, including co-ops, ESOPs, and trusts. In terms of the where, here's the list of cities and sometimes counties where we found local policy initiatives. As you can see, there's a lot going on in California. There were 11 policy initiatives based in California. We found 3 in Florida, 3 in New York, 3 in Pennsylvania. And then in terms of policies, through our informational meetings with folks in the field, while we were trying to understand what they were doing, we identified 5 major categories of policy. So one was outreach to existing business owners, as well as one, helping business owners explore a transaction, then helping them actually do the transaction, focusing on helping people start new EO businesses, and then policies that focused on businesses that were already employee owned. And underneath those broader categories, you'll see some specific policies, which I can go into in more detail later. So here are our high-level findings on policies advancing employee ownership at the local level. So you'll see that business owners outreach, 25 out of 32 involve some element of outreach to business owners. In terms of exploring EO, 25 out of 32 involved a focus on services for business owners who are exploring a conversion to employee ownership. 10 out of 32 involve support for business owners going through a transaction. 7 out of 32 involve support for startups of employee-owned businesses. And then 0 out of 32 involve policies focused on existing EO companies. So this kind of shows that the majority of policies at the local level currently focus on outreach to business owners, as well as helping them explore employee ownership. So diving a little into each specific category of policy. So under outreach to business owners, you'll see in this chart that the most common things we found were educational sessions for owners, as well as contacting outreach to business owners. And then, in different cases, some of these other policies as well, data collection, a website focusing on EO initiatives, establishing an EO office, media campaigns. And one example of business outreach to business owners was in the city of Santa Clara, where they launched a worker co-op initiative in 2019 to assist locally owned businesses at risk of retention by partnering with Project Equity, helping them learn about the option of EO succession, as well as working with DAWI, with the Sustainable Economies Law Center, and the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops to provide educational workshops for the community. In terms of exploring EO, most policies focused on partnering with TA providers, and in most cases with funding provided as well. So a recent example of this, New York City launched its 2020 Employee Ownership New York City, where they partnered with TA providers, with DAWI, the Working World, ICA Group, New York City Local Business Outreach Center Network, and they offered a whole range of consultation, assessment, succession planning, training, and education services for business owners considering and implementing the transition to employee ownership. You'll see that less frequently, cities' policies focused on developing business owner toolkits and sometimes in-house technical assistance as well. In terms of supporting transactions, as you can see, especially relative to the previous 2 categories, there are some examples of policies around financing partnerships, subsidizing transaction costs, loan guarantees, but it's definitely a less common policy approach. And one example of where we did see this was in Berkeley, where worker co-ops are included in the city's small business revolving loan fund. In terms of startups, this category looked at any policies providing support to people looking to start an employee-owned business. So one example of educational sessions and training was in Austin, Texas, where the city council approved in 2020 a contract with the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley to provide training, coaching, how-to information to anyone interested in starting a co-op business. And in Madison, Wisconsin, the Madison Cooperative Development Coalition, which is a City of Madison funded initiative, they provide $10,000 seed grants to co-op startups. And then finally, in terms of policy supporting existing EO companies, we were surprised to find none. No purchasing preferences, no tax benefits, no other subsidies or incentives for existing EO companies.
Yeah, and that particular was very interesting finding. I mean, when you think about policy and politics, right, it often comes down to constituencies, and there's this big constituency of companies, the employee-owned companies themselves, who likely have a lot to gain from city policies promoting or favoring employee-owned companies in some way. And so just seems like a potential opportunity at least from our perspective. But we obviously work with a lot of employee-owned companies, so that's where we spend a lot of our time thinking about things. And so, kind of in just at a high level, it seems like a lot of the work is focused on creating new employee-owned companies, which is also a great, very important thing. So it's just kind of an interesting summary finding. Another thing to call out, so Melissa Hoover mentioned in the chat the owner to owners hotline project in New York City as an interesting example of reaching out to some folks as well. So dropping that link in the chat here. And that, I guess, is I should also mention if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll just take those as they come up, because it's great. If you're thinking about something, I'm sure someone else is thinking about it as well. So definitely drop it in there. All right, well, Nina, thank you so much for that summary. Next, we'll hand it over to Hillary, who will walk us through the great work that Project Equity is doing. So Hillary, you should be able to just share your screen.
Wonderful. How's the sound? Can you guys hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Well, good morning. It's great to have so many people on this call. And I'm so grateful to Nina and Thomas at Certified EO for doing this research and pulling the information together, because I think there's a lot of informal learning and conversation across folks doing this work. But the more we can generate, cross-pollinate the learnings, and the more we can build the field together, the more powerful I think the work will become. So thank you so much, Thomas and Nina. And it's great to be here as well with Kevin McPhillips. I'm looking forward to hearing about the work in Pittsburgh. So as I pull up my screen for screen share, I do want to say that the work I'll be speaking about today is work that my wonderful colleagues at Project Equity do, primarily Evan Edwards and Allison Lingane and others on our team. And I've been involved in the Santa Clara initiative. Kirk Vartan is here, who got that whole thing going and brought the players together. But I'm speaking about the work of my colleagues. So I just wanted to acknowledge their amazing work and appreciate that as I get started. So what I'm hoping to do over the next about 15 minutes, and I am going to set my timer here so that I don't lose track of time. Those of you who know me know that once I get started talking about employee ownership, I can go on and on. So what I'm hoping to do, once I get the slides to advance, there we go, is to talk briefly about our perspective at Project Equity on policy and government engagement, just at a high level, and the specific approach that we've been taking and now replicated and adapted in many local city governments and also with several counties across the country. So I'll kind of walk you through our approach, touch a little bit on a couple of examples. Berkeley was our first and is still our first sustained initiative with a city, and Miami-Dade County is one of our newer ones. And then there's some insights and learnings that I hope to share as well. So just a quick word on how we view policy and government engagement. We do like to use the term government engagement because the vast majority of what we have been doing is actually not done through a policy process. It's really working with champions in often elected officials. In some cases, we have a city council member or a county commissioner who's helped us maybe get some funding from the county, or in Berkeley, the mayor, Jesse Arreguin, has been an incredible champion. He started as a city council person. Sustainable Economies Law Center got him excited about this work, started driving the interest, and then he became mayor, which has been wonderful. So we need champions, and then the work that we're doing primarily is really what I would call programming, is working with economic development staff or others in the city government to do the type of outreach I'll be describing. So both are very important, but we like to distinguish because there is a lot of policy work that's needed at the local, state, and federal level to scale employee ownership for all of the reasons that Thomas briefly alluded to in the beginning of this call, and I think most people on the call know about. I'm not going to walk through this grid, but I just wanted to share that from a policy perspective, ways to fund and operationalize awareness raising and education is a huge priority at every level. Is usually the sort of number one thing that when we talk about barriers to more employee ownership is the lack of awareness. We have been using feasibility subsidies, partial subsidies or discounts on feasibility studies. It's something that's been done in a couple of states. It's something that has been part of not all of our local government engagements, but many of them. And we find that that does help business owners take that first step. Part of the reason this work is so important is that business owners, like most human beings, don't plan enough for the future. So they're behind on their succession planning and often having a deadline, like you can apply for this subsidy, or having that discount, that coupon mentality can help get things going. But that is something that we would love to see happening throughout the systems that are funded by federal dollars, that are networked and supported through the states, and similar practices can be done at the local level. And then, of course, the capital piece is really important. And we see the government role in that as being most powerful at the federal and state level. And it is something that can be done at a local level, but it's been a smaller part. We haven't felt that that need was as strong at the local level. So we focused on awareness and education. But I do believe that policy usually follows practice. So what we are trying to do is get local governments engaged, programmatically encouraging and supporting employee ownership. And we believe that that will link powerfully to work at the state level, and that will benefit from and feed into work at the federal level. So we see all of these levels of policy as being distinct, but very much linked to each other. And I hope that in the years ahead, we as a movement, if you will, as an employee ownership field, will be getting policy wins at all of these levels. I'll be talking a bit about our work in California. I want to acknowledge that we were one of many great organizations who co-founded the Worker-Owned Recovery California Coalition last year. And so, that coalition is working with actors in the state. We don't have anything, major happening from the state yet, but our hope at Project Equity is that the kind of work I'm describing on the ground helps to make the work real to folks at the state, and that when the state kicks in, it'll help to make the work on the ground even more powerful. Our goals with government engagement are really threefold at a high level. Our approach is really to focus first and foremost on the near-term goal of driving transitions of new businesses to employee ownership. And the reason for that is that having those live examples, some communities already have them, but many don't, or at least they're not aware of them. And having live examples, not only that can showcase the benefits of employee ownership and be champions, and elected officials can come and visit those companies, nothing replaces that. But also having examples of how the transition gets made, how the city has supported a transition or multiple transitions. We think that's what's going to get the city interested in doing the work in the long term, is to really see results early on. So that is our primary focus. In the medium term, we work with those city players to, as I know others here do in their programming, to embed employee ownership into the city's or the county's approach to economic development. And I'll just say, I'm going to use the word city to mean any local government, just for shorthand. And finally, we do believe that at every stage, legitimizing and normalizing employee ownership is the benefit here, and that's what will help drive towards sustainability and scale of this work. And we are engaging multiple stakeholders in the local ecosystem. So SBDCs, small business development centers, are actually partnering in many of our city initiatives. And also there's other, many of the organizations represented on this call, like Democracy at Work Institute and Sustainable Economies Law Center, and many others, are sometimes directly involved in the same initiatives we are, or have been doing something before we came in. And that's all very synergistic, as well as engaging others who are just rooted in those communities and can be part of this work. These are the local governments we're currently engaged with. There are 3 in the Bay Area, those top 3, 3 in Southern California. We're also doing some early stage work in San Diego, but we're not working directly with the government, so we're not including that here. And one of our newer initiatives is in Miami-Dade County. And in Atlanta, we have some work that's been in planning stages for more than a year and is now getting going. So that's one that we're very excited about as well. And I'll say that both Miami-Dade County and Atlanta are places where Democracy at Work Institute has had its seed fellowship prior to the work that we were doing. And that's certainly been very powerful in terms of generating local interest and employee ownership. So our approach, just to walk through it kind of step by step, is that we start by framing or reframing the issue. So essentially, we're going to a city government, to the economic development folks or the electeds who are interested, and saying, you need to think a little bit differently about economic development. You need to be retaining the businesses that are here in your community because there is this thing called the silver tsunami. I won't go into those details because I think everyone's generally familiar. And the way that we do this work is we use data to drive that awareness and really ground it and have it sink in for people. And that's an in-depth landscape analysis of the local businesses. And we're analyzing, how many of them are 10 or more years old, how many are 20 or more years old, 30 or more years old, how big are those businesses, what industries are they in? And then the analysis that comes out, I won't go to the punchline yet, but really demonstrates the outsized impact of legacy businesses on jobs and revenue to the city. So that's our first step, is to say, hey, you've got a problem, the silver tsunami, and you've got an opportunity to retain those businesses through employee ownership transitions. We often will use that data study to also kind of educate and do publicity. Sometimes we'll get media. More and more, we're starting to do direct outreach to businesses using, paid media, using advertising, and that's been exciting over the past year or so. We've been experimenting with that and finding it to be very impactful. And then we'll also do, trainings and education and work hand in hand with the local leaders within the city staff who have responsibility for related programming, and we need to be, if not fully fluent, of course, we would love for them to be fully fluent in employee ownership, but the goal is really to get them, at a basic level of literacy and able to kind of do appropriate handoffs and referrals when businesses want to learn more, but to have that confidence to put it on the table and to start to integrate it into their programming. Stage 3 is that business outreach. And I'll give the example of what we did in Berkeley, and it's similar to what we do elsewhere, but it looks a little different, as you can imagine, in each locality. In Berkeley, we actually kind of wrote the letter, and then, with the city's approval, it went on city letterhead signed by, I think it was a leader of the economic development department, and we put it in the mail. So, city governments are very strapped, and some of them don't even have an economic development department. So, for example, the work we're doing in Santa Clara with other partners is the first small business programming that the city has ever had. So it's just amazing that that's focusing on worker cooperatives. It's very exciting, but that just gives you an idea of how little some cities are staffed to do this work. So we like to be a one-stop shop and say, hey, we'll make it easy on you. So we sent out a snail mail mailing. We emailed follow-up. We actually did calls in the case of Berkeley. We don't do that as much. And that was to a list of 200 priority businesses. That came out of a bigger list of 1,200 older businesses in Berkeley. And then we do, because Project Equity does a lot of awareness raising and business outreach, as well as we have our client services team. So we're able to kind of directly connect people into free consultations, feasibility studies, and then transition and post-transition services. So that's our 5-step process. I'll give a couple of examples from Berkeley and Miami-Dade County. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the tools we use. So the data studies have become a very important part of our work. And I told you I wasn't going to reveal the punchline. Well, this is the punchline. If you look across these very different localities, Long Beach and Port City in Southern California, Berkeley, Bellingham, Washington, a much smaller city up in Washington State, they all have about 20% of their businesses in the city are what we call legacy businesses, 20 years old or more. And about 1/3 of the employees in the city work for those businesses. And close to 60% of the business revenue in the city comes from those businesses. So it's a little bit different in each place. It's really important that we're working with real data from that place, because that's what really drives the message home. But essentially the story is the same, which is you can't just focus on attracting corporations into your city for all kinds of reasons, including that these businesses are already here. They're strong businesses. They've survived for decades and they deserve to stay. And they can really empower and build wealth for their employees when they're employee owned. These are just some examples of our advertising. Time's going quickly, so I won't linger here, but we do both online ads, and we've also done some print and some publications in their online versions like Berkeley Side here. And I won't talk this through, but this is the services that we do have directly and kind of connect people into the technical assistance that goes from the exploration phase all the way through to after the transition. We have a 2-year support program. So as I mentioned, in Berkeley, this is a multi-year partnership now that involves Sustainable Economies Law Center and us, as well as the city itself. This is a picture from with the mayor there in the middle from one of the gatherings. I think this was after a city council meeting where the initiative was discussed. And this initiative has had all of the components that I described, as well as some events. I'll touch on that in one second. This is the infographic that we used as part of our business outreach and just for general education and awareness raising. And you can see this was one of our earlier presentations, both of the that outsized impact of those 1,200 businesses in Berkeley, and then some of the benefits of employee ownership. This was a really fun event. It was hosted by Sunlight and Power, which is a wonderful employee-owned company that is both an ESOP and a cooperative. There was some really creative work by the ICA Group and the Beister Institute to create what they're calling an ESOPerative. And so they're in Berkeley. They hosted the event. The person in the middle there with my colleague Donna is Jordan Klein from the city of Berkeley. So he spoke, as did the selling owners of Adams and Chittenden Scientific Glass and some of the new worker owners in what is now a cooperative. These are some of the folks from Adams and Chittenden. The 2 white-haired men in the middle are the original owners, and the folks surrounding them, there's a couple people from Project Equity and Shared Capital Cooperative, which provided the financing through our joint initiative. But the others are worker owners. So they spoke at that event, and we invited local businesses, and that was the old school way that we were bringing people together to learn from each other. So some of the results of Berkeley, Adams and Chittenden Scientific Glass did convert and had a small subsidy for some of their technical assistance costs from the city. We have several new conversions in Berkeley that are about to be announced. So I'm excited to have that news come out in the next couple of months about 2 new companies completing their transitions, and there are others in the pipeline. And also SELC was able to drive some policy changes in this case, which I think Nina already spoke to, both to how the loan fund gets around that barrier of personal guarantees and adding co-ops to the business license form. So those are the types of kind of ongoing, what I would call sort of policy or regulation changes that are really helpful and help this programming stick for the long run. It's that complement of city direct programming and outreach with policy changes.
Hillary, there were a couple of good questions here that came up that I think might be good to address as well. So one question was from Paul, kind of regarding the data that you're getting to do the outreach. Where's the data coming from?
Yeah, so this is this slide has our data from Miami-Dade County. Our primary data source is actually Dun & Bradstreet. So we got a paid subscription and we mine that data. It's not always 100% accurate or up to date, but it seems to be the most accurate source out there. And that was a big learning, because when we first did these data studies with cities, we were getting business lists, business registration records from the cities. And believe it or not, their records we found were not as robust as what we could find on Dun & Bradstreet. And when we have both, we'll combine them and kind of triangulate the data.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely something that's important to understand, is where to actually find this list to do the outreach. Another good question from Tim. So talking about the success metrics. So obviously conversions or transitions is a main metric here, but it takes a while to see that flow through the pipeline. So what other sorts of efficacy metrics have you used to measure the success of your initiatives?
Yeah. It's such a great question. Because our strategy is really so focused on getting those actual conversions, we have, what do you call them? Along the way metrics, our pipeline funnel, how many consultations are we doing with Berkeley businesses? How many people come to the events? What is our advertising? What kind of open rates or click rates and all of that stuff? We can track all of that stuff. So those are kind of like activity metrics that we'll use. But for us in the long run, the real results are the converted companies and then the ways that the city is embedding the work in their own programming. And to be honest, one of the takeaways from all this that I want to share with you all is that it's multi-year work. Like we really don't see it as, a 6-month program or, something that's going to create change that will continue underway through a short-term initiative. And it is because, as Tim said, the pipeline process is so long. So yeah, but the ways that it gets embedded, I think things like, those examples from Berkeley. And I think the main thing I would think about is, does the local government, are there people on that staff? Are there programs that have employee ownership just baked in as part of what that program is there to do? And are there people who are fluent in it and can keep it going would be a metric I'd look for as well, in addition to policy relationship.
So kind of the lasting impact within the city and building that sort of stakeholder network. Yeah, that's great. Well, I know you have a lot of great stuff. Why don't we do Miami-Dade data study, and then we'll go to Pittsburgh with Kevin.
Cool. You know what I'll do is I'll just skip over this because I'd actually love to just do the quick takeaways.
Oh yeah, perfect.
Yeah, let me do those. And this is an event we did a couple of years ago that we're hoping to do again, getting government leaders from different localities together, because we found that to be very, very powerful. But the key insights, just sort of 2 minutes to wrap up on these. I already spoke to the first. Local leaders don't know it, but those legacy businesses have a huge impact. So they're so important to local communities. That message about the silver tsunami and business retention is really getting people's attention because business tax is such a primary revenue driver for them. But there are other reasons to support this work. And we're finding that during the pandemic, retention, recovery, all of that, as you might imagine, and just business resiliency. So the fact that employee ownership makes businesses stronger. And then there's quality jobs and racial equity and all of those different angles. Some of our work, several of the localities we're working with have actually funded the work themselves out of their budgets. And we're finding that gives them a particular buy-in, gives them skin in the game, to use the cliche. And we've had some others that were funded by philanthropy, and those have also, moved forward and been valuable. But there is something I think that can be game-changing about getting that funding from the government themselves. I already spoke about the subsidies. And again, we found that the full subsidy has more downsides than the partial subsidy, and that the partial subsidy gets you the benefit of it. And we're always working with companies that are solid businesses with profitability, because those are the ones that it's worth it for the employees to own in terms of our mission. So they have the ability to pay for technical assistance. So the subsidy is really about getting folks to take action. I spoke a bit to, this is not one and done. So I've already mentioned that, but that's a key message. Something that we've learned. And as I said, I think this is different at the state and federal level. I think policy change, very strictly defined as critical at the state and federal level. But at the local level, I think that policies and regulatory changes are important. But I think that it's the programmatic engagement of the city and reaching businesses and getting employee ownership on the table. If you had to have one or the other, I would go with the programming, and hopefully we get to have both in a lot of places. So I'll leave it at that. Look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much, Hillary. All right, Kevin, I think you should be able to share your screen, and we'll
I think I can.
We can go to Pittsburgh.
Call this up here. Can you see that?
Yeah, I think I just pinned.
Good.
I think I just pinned you.
Okay, how's the volume? Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great, good. Okay. First of all, Hillary, thanks so much. That was terrific. Really enjoyed learning a lot about that. There's a principle in anthropology called parallel evolution, and I think a lot of the lessons that we've been learning, I'm seeing in your research as well. So I know we're on the right track. Good. I'm going to talk for a few moments about a project that we're doing in Pittsburgh. But first, I want to sort of explain who we are. We're the Pennsylvania Center for Employee Ownership, and we are a state center, much like a number of other states have state centers. And what's maybe a little bit unique about our organization is that we exist for one purpose and one purpose only, which is to raise awareness. We don't sell anything. We don't charge anything for our services. We don't do technical assistance. Our sole purpose is to raise awareness. Tim Garbinski and company at the NCEO did a very fine piece of research back in 2015 that brought us all to the very obvious conclusion that the reason that there aren't more employee-owned businesses is that people simply don't know about it. So the purpose for the Pennsylvania Center is simply to build a model that raises awareness as best we can, to then bring people to employee ownership. So in the course of discussions at our organization, we came up with the idea of conducting an experiment. And although there's lots of different kinds of employee ownership, and we all know that, we're focusing on two of them. The ESOP, the Employee Stock Ownership Plan, as well as worker cooperatives. So the thing they have in similarity is that in both of these, everyone who works there is part of the ownership group, and that was very important to us. We're trying to attack problems that are related to the working poor and the wealth gap, et cetera. So we're going to focus on these. And the concept was as follows. We spend a lot of time working individually, talking to prospects, working with chambers of commerce and trade groups and members of government and economic development folks. But we said, what if we take a very broad-based approach and we try to do a marketing program that goes to a very large number of people, not a couple at a time or a handful of time, but a really large number. And we also feel that although there's value at every level of government, whether it is nationally, whether it's at the state level, where we do some work, we really feel like we want to get to the grassroots and we wanted to test the municipal level. Now, there's a bunch of cities in Pennsylvania, the two largest being Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. And we had city council hearings on employee ownership in both of those cities. Both were very engaged and interested and really terrific. Philadelphia's got about 1.5 million people, and Pittsburgh has 300,000. So we decided we're going to focus on Pittsburgh because it's a more manageable chunk. One of the things that was important to us was establishing significant partners in an operational task force, decision makers who could move the dial from government, banking, business, education, media, the important areas that could move the dial for us. One of the other concepts we thought about is, although if an organization is appropriate for an ESOP, they generally don't have issues with funding. But if it's a co-op, and we anticipated that most of the businesses we were going to be looking at were going to be smaller, there are challenges, there are economic challenges. So we wanted to create a funding model, and Hillary referenced this a little bit, that didn't have personal guarantees. Okay, it's got, it's in my mind really problematic to convert a business to a group of people whose financial means may not be great, and put a burden such as this on them. So that was one of our goals and requirements as we put this plan together. And lastly, we wanted to establish professional relationships, partnerships with community groups, because we didn't want to do this by ourselves. We wanted to engage the various communities within Pittsburgh to do this together. So we had to approach the city. And so here's what we said to them. We said, one of the things that employee ownership can do, it can keep the businesses in Pittsburgh. It can create and save jobs. Pittsburgh's population is decreasing from one census to the next, and they're losing businesses. And that's an important characteristic for their city council and for the mayor's office. So that was important. We know we can create value for owners through employee ownership. Very important, we can add to the city revenue base, because if you keep people there, if you create more jobs, you're going to have city wage taxes, and you're going to increase the revenue base. Also, the more people you keep there, the more people who buy homes, and there's real estate tax, et cetera. So that's a real qualifier for them. Obviously, stem the loss of business closures, the loss of revenue due to business closures. Also importantly, we wanted to obviously create real futures for people. And this is not a secondary issue for the city of Pittsburgh. They really are focused on the people, the value of their lifestyles, and their ability to care for themselves and their families. And we also know that through some of the work at the NCEO, some terrific work, that the effect of employee ownership on minority business owners is dramatic, and that's very important. Most of the local neighborhoods, and we all know that employee owners have more retirement savings, and surprise, employee-owned companies, are much more productive. So this is the argument with the city, and they were very excited about the prospect. So in January of 2016, which is when our organization began, we had an outreach from Dr. David Feingold, who is the new president of Chatham University in Pittsburgh. And if you don't know Chatham, I highly encourage you to check it out. Extraordinary university. They boast the nation's only fully sustainable campus. And every one of their programs, whether it's nursing or mathematics, has some aspect of social justice in it. And I have great respect for them. Some of you may know Dr. David Feingold, who was Joseph Blasi's boss at Rutgers. David was the second in command at Rutgers and was instrumental in creating the program there in the graduate school around employee ownership. So he called and he said, how about if we partner and try to do something here? In 2018, he introduced me to Mayor Bill Peduto. And Mayor Peduto didn't know much about employee ownership, but when he heard about it, he became an evangelist. And he said, let's set up city council hearings and let's do something together. So in January 2019, we held the hearings, and without going into great detail, one of the members ended up crying at the end of the session, and she became my co-chair, Council Member Erica Strasburger, for the creation of the what we believe is the nation's first citywide task force on employee ownership. In September of 2019, City Council, Chatham University, and our organization banded together, created the task force, and we met 3 times between 2019 and 2020. Our last meeting, we had 3 meetings. Our last meeting was in March of 2020, and something bad happened. So as a result of COVID, we made a decision that we've got to put this on hold. So we made a lot of gains, and I'll talk about this in a moment, but we said it would be irresponsible to set up community meetings in neighborhood groups, et cetera, during the pandemic. So we need to figure out when we can launch this thing. We've done a lot of the groundwork. We're ready to go, but we need to be sort of clear of the pandemic. We had another meeting last month to reorganize and regroup with them, and we're all committed, continuing to moving this thing forward. But we need to wait for an opening. Just some things about our organization and what's happening in Pennsylvania. In 2015, the year before we engaged, Pennsylvania was in the lower half, based on the 5,500 data, of states in terms of new employee ownership. In each of the last 2 data years from the U.S. Labor Department, we were very pleased to rank as first in the nation in per capita employee ownership growth, and second in the nation in pure numbers, behind only California with 3 times the population. So we think we have a model that can work. We just need to find the moment to kind of launch a plan. We took this on the road, the concept and what we're doing, and we met with Philadelphia, we met with York County, which will include the sort of the center of the state, Harrisburg, Lancaster, and York County. And we met with the Erie Regional Growth Partnership. Erie is a city in Pennsylvania in the far northwest. All 3 of those are interested in doing the same thing that we're doing in Pittsburgh, but obviously we need to show some successes first, from the launch. Also, we're working closely with members of the Pennsylvania House, and we've actually have a draft bill for the creation of a Pennsylvania Office of Employee Ownership in the Economic Development Department. modeled similarly after Colorado and what Massachusetts are doing. So we're optimistic about that as well. I don't expect you to read this, but this is a listing of the task force itself. It includes Pennsylvania's Lieutenant Governor, John Fetterman. It includes 3 members of the House of Representatives. It includes 3 members of Pittsburgh City Council, senior members of banking organizations such as PNC, the CEOs of ESOP companies, the leaders of co-ops in Pittsburgh, and of course, employee owners, which is very important. So the concept or the plan is first collect data, and Hillary, you talked a lot about data collection and a bit about that. First collect some data, get some good data. Secondly, do outreach to community groups, which we have done to get partners to work with us. Meet with all of them. Send a blast communication, both digitally and traditional mail, from the city of Pittsburgh and from the Pennsylvania Center. A communication goes out from each of those 30 partner groups as well to the more locally specified areas. Coordinate and schedule group meetings within those community groups to do educational sessions, which we would host along with members of City Council. Through all of this, do a public relations program, radio spots, television, digital, social media, and print. And then, of course, catch, follow up with anyone that is interested in going further on this. Again, I don't expect you to read this. The first thing we had to do is we had to get the data. So we worked with City Council and the Carnegie Library, and we were able to get very specific data on 60,000 businesses in Pittsburgh that included, who the leaders were, revenue, number of employees, age of the business, et cetera. And I'll preempt the question that Hillary was asked. We also, the Carnegie Library data, it includes Dun & Bradstreet, Hoover's, which is now one organization, as well as the finance information from the city of Pittsburgh. So they banged that all together and gave us, something that's, let's call it a little better than the Hoover's and Dun & D&B data. But we took the 60,000 companies and we vetted them down to 30,000 that we think are, quote, appropriate for the message of employee ownership. And I'll tell you that the vast majority of them are small companies, probably more appropriate for cooperatives. And about 4,000 of them are ESOP appropriate, and the balance are really probably more cooperative. Commercial corridor businesses, Main Street businesses, such as that. The mayor's office and the mayor worked with us to create the community partners group, 30 businesses, 30 community groups. We didn't go with, the baseball groups or the, sidewalk cleanup groups, et cetera. We wanted the ones that, were business related. And the mayor said, here are the ones that you want to work with. So we got about 30 of those. And during the pandemic, we've been doing, virtual presentations with each of them to get them on board. And without exception so far, every one of them said, absolutely, we'll host you at our monthly meeting, or we'll set up a separate meeting, for our group. And we're happy to market to everyone in whatever's our best way. Some people will send leaflets, put leaflets under doors. Some people will do it digitally. Some people will send mailings out. I mentioned the funding problem. And one of the things that was important to us was trying to develop a template for funding so that every time we had a candidate for a co-op, let's say, we didn't have to go back to the drawing board and say, let's go, go to this person, let's go to that person, let's see. So what we've developed is what we call 4 templates. And all of them, and let me be clear, are based on, a term sheet and a series of covenants, So these are, economically viable alternatives, okay? First one is we call the capital stack, which has a seller's note, which has a commitment from the URA, which is the Urban Redevelopment Authority in Pittsburgh. In fact, the URA, Tom Link, who's terrific there, said, I'll fund the first 2. I'll just do it, okay? Not to worry. He said, that's what we're in business to do. Let me do it. It was so great. So we know we can get a couple of them off the ground. The economic development option, okay? Seller note, low interest loan from the URA, and a small municipal grant from the city of Pittsburgh. Third one is CDFI. So there's lots of CDFIs. There's about 4 or 5 of them in Pittsburgh. Their business is to try to help and fund startup organizations that make sense for the city. And they'll take a look at each one. We're working with one group called Bridgeway Capital. They'll look at the particular circumstance of the business, and if it makes sense, they're in. And then the last one is actually a crowdfunding option. There's an organization called Honeycomb Credit, which does crowdfunding and would be interested in working as well. So depending on the organization, depending on the thresholds that they're at, the levels that they can meet, they may be eligible for one of these four. Hillary, just like yours, we put some collateral together. We're putting together what we call a toolkit as well, which is sort of a single package for the people who express a real interest that gives them things that they need, such as referral sources, whether they're co-op or they're an ESOP, and what to do next. One for co-ops, one for ESOPs, and of course, throughout all of this, we're driving people to the website. Okay, and they can sort of click on ESOPs, they can click on co-ops, they can find out what they need. We're going to take them to a place where they can learn information, and then they can connect with us. They can, contact us, and we'll work with them in any way we need to get them to the point where they can work with sources to assist them to go forward. As I said, we don't do technical assistance. We just want to we want to get the cart so far and then turn them over to the experts. That's what we're doing. And as soon as we can get out of this this mess we're in, we're excited to launch, and we're keeping our fingers crossed. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share a little info.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That's fantastic to hear about everything that y'all are doing. I'm very excited to see what comes of it once you can really get rolling. All right, well, now we basically are set up for Q&A. So I think we have a few questions on deck here, and then if y'all have others, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. The first one here is really about the guarantees. So I know that kind of a theme here, across this, is that every initiative we saw had some either was co-op focused or included all types of employership, including co-ops. And I know a thing that's mentioned often with co-ops, a challenge to making these work is the personal guarantee. Hillary, could you tell us a little bit about what specifically that is and why it's a barrier and how y'all are looking to get past that?
Sure, I'll be quick, and Kevin can add if he wants. Yeah, just personal guarantees are the most common way that small business loans get guaranteed, because there's often not collateral. So that personal guarantee is the throat to choke, as bankers sometimes call it, or the house you're going to repossess if the loan goes south. And they tend to want to have every owner provide a guarantee, and that's just not viable when you have 10, 20, 100 owners in a co-op. So there are other ways to underwrite the loans. In fact, there was a House committee, small business committee hearing on Capitol Hill this morning about ESOPs and cooperatives, and it spoke to ways that the USDA has guaranteed loans. And I know locally a lot of CDFIs will fund nonprofit organizations or housing development or that kind of thing, and you don't have individual throats to choke in those types of loans either. So our favorite, we do cash flow based lending. Basically, you do projections. If you think they're viable, then you invest because you believe the business is sound based on historical and really understanding the nature of the business. The thing that SELT came up with in Berkeley was very unique, and I don't know the details of it. I think they were not able to get rid of the personal guarantees altogether, which really is the preferred route for co-ops, not for necessarily for any other businesses. That's a different question, but for co-op lending. So they just had an alternative where certain individuals would be part of jointly guaranteeing the loan, and people could rotate on and off of that panel among the worker owners. So no one had to kind of take that responsibility for the long term, and not everybody had to take that responsibility. So it was a creative workaround. And I'm still hoping that we'll be able to just say there's other ways to underwrite loans. There's lots of, personal guarantees aren't used most of the time anyway. So that's my take on it.
It makes a lot of sense. Kevin, got one for you from Zen here. So thinking about the city's role in supporting the capital access gap for co-ops, and you mentioned considering a backstop. Could you share a little bit more information about that?
Yeah, well, I think Zen, thanks for the question. I think you read something in there that wasn't, but you're clairvoyant. I'll explain in a second. What the city has agreed to is providing a grant, a small grant, 10% of the required funds. And by the way, the funds are for the sale price and technical assistance, right? So they've agreed in one condition to provide 10%. What we are talking to them about is a backstop and a guarantee in certain circumstances or conditions that would go a long way. We've also made an approach actually to sectors of the SBA. We feel that would fit neatly into what their mission and goals are. They do it all the time for private businesses. In my former business, we had an SBA backstop on a significant loan that we had. So I think that could be a wonderful place for the SBA to play. Then you're dealing with the national bureaucracy, which is not always easy. But we're asking the city to consider that, and no answer yet. They by the way, City of Pittsburgh will be having a new mayor. Bill Peduto did not win the Democratic primary. Representative Ed Gainey did, and I just share this quickly. We met with Ed Gainey. Never heard of an ESOP. Never heard or knew vaguely what a co-op was, as in the East End co-op, food co-op in Pittsburgh. When we explained everything, he became an absolute evangelist. And he said something interesting that I've been sharing with people. He said, Kevin, this is a public health issue. And I never really thought of it in that context. But he said, look, people that don't have wherewithal, people that are working poor, people that are impoverished, people that don't have a future, they suffer in ways that the rest of us don't. So this is a public health issue. Yeah.
Powerful. Okay, great. Well, unfortunately, we're probably not going to get to all the questions. So one thing I'm going to do is send a follow-up email to all the participants. Kevin, Hillary, to start with you, I'll share everyone's contact info in there so people can follow up directly. But basically, just want to end on kind of one question. So the hope here is that a lot of folks will, we want more city policy initiatives as well, right? So Hillary, Kevin, for each of you, just kind of based on your experience, if you were, for someone we're starting in a city where there's nothing really going on and you're trying to get something going, what would be the one thing to focus on first to get something like this rolling?
It's a great question. I guess I'll say that I think helping the city understand the value of employee ownership and the importance of business retention. So making the case of why it's important, and then finding a good partner who can do some, or, in our case, it would be like we can do all of those pieces I described. Kevin's strategy is another great one that's really bringing together all the pieces, and you don't have to have sort of a soup to nuts approach, but finding the right partner who can do some pieces of the work together with the city is where I would start.
Yeah, I would say a similar thing. I'd say partners and support from the top. If you're in a city, my mind is first, leadership starts from the top. Get the support of whoever the city administrator is, whoever the mayor is, or whatever. Get their support, and then connect with the community groups that for whom this would be viable, valuable, and important.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you all so much for attending, for joining. As I mentioned, I'll send a follow-up email later today with the materials that we Certified EO put together, as well as contact information. So if your question we didn't have time to get to, just feel free to ask it directly. And as I mentioned, we are trying to keep this landscape up to date as well. So if you hear about things, or there are new things, or things we're missing, definitely let us know. And I'm looking forward to seeing everything that comes out of all these great, exciting initiatives at the city level. All right, thank you all so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.